Good evening, brave souls. I'm Grim. They call me a ghost now, but I was once like you, alive. Tonight, I'll be your companion through the shadows. So, get comfortable, if you're ready. The night has only just begun, and the stories are waiting to be told. In a small, quiet village nestled between the mountains of Korea, life was peaceful. The villagers whispered of ancient tales, of fox spirits and demons that wandered the forests at night. But no one truly believed those stories anymore, except for one boy, Minho. He had heard too many rumors about men disappearing, lured away by a mysterious woman who appeared only when the moon was full. They say she has 9 tails, the elder warned, and eyes like fire. But Minho had always been curious. He had never feared the old tales until the night he saw her for himself. One late evening, Minho wandered the outskirts of the village, following the forest's edge. The full moon bathed everything in silver light. That's when he saw her, a beautiful woman, standing alone by the river, her long black hair shimmering in the light. "Come closer," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "I've been waiting for you." Minho's heart raced. Her beauty was otherworldly, her smile enchanting. But something in her eyes, those fiery, glowing eyes, made him pause. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his distance. "I am but a lonely traveler," she purred, stepping closer. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" Minho felt a strange pull, like an invisible thread drawing him to her. But as he looked closer, he saw a flicker of something behind her. 9 tails, swirling in the shadows. The stories were true. She was a kumiho, a demon fox in disguise. The kumiho smiled and reached into her sleeve, pulling out a small, glowing jewel. She held it delicately between her fingers, rolling it across her hand. The jewel pulsed with light, mesmerizing him. "This is for you," she whispered, her voice becoming more hypnotic. She approached Minho, the jewel glowing brighter. "Just hold still." The jewel floated toward his mouth, and he felt a strange energy pulling at him, trying to drain his strength. He realized she was trying to steal his soul. In a moment of panic, Minho did the only thing he could think of. He swallowed the jewel. The kumiho's eyes widened in shock. "No!" she screamed, her voice turning sharp and angry. "You fool!" Minho's vision blurred, but instead of feeling weaker, he felt stronger. The jewel had given him wisdom. He could now see through her trickery, see her true form. He had to stop her before she lured anyone else to their death. Minho stumbled back, the energy of the jewel swirling inside him. His mind cleared, and suddenly the kumiho's true form revealed itself. Sharp claws, a snarling face, and a monstrous form covered in fur. Her 9 tails lashed out angrily, glowing with dark energy. "You've made a grave mistake," the kumiho hissed, her voice now venomous. But Minho didn't run. With the wisdom granted by the jewel, he now understood her weaknesses. The kumiho could be defeated, but he couldn't do it alone. "I'll never let you harm another soul," he said firmly, backing away toward the village. "The villagers will stop you." The kumiho's laughter echoed through the forest. "You think they'll believe you? I'll destroy you all before dawn." Minho ran back to the village, bursting into his home and waking his father. "The kumiho! She's real!" he panted. "She's been hunting us!" His father looked at him in disbelief, but Minho's eyes were full of conviction. "I've seen her true form, and she's coming for the village." Reluctantly, his father rallied the villagers. Armed with torches, salt, and ancient talismans, the men gathered at the edge of the forest. The kumiho had terrorized them long enough. "She's coming!" Minho warned as the wind howled through the trees. The villagers, though afraid, held their ground. The Kumiho appeared from the shadows, her eyes glowing red, her tail swirling like a storm behind her. "You cannot stop me," she growled, stepping toward the villagers. But Minho stepped forward, holding out the enchanted jewel that now glowed faintly in his hand. "We're not afraid of you." The villagers threw salt and held up their talismans, chanting ancient prayers. The Kumiho shrieked as the power of the jewel and the villagers' combined strength weakened her. Her 9 tails flickered, fading into smoke as the magic in the air grew stronger. With one final, ear-piercing scream, the Kumiho dissolved into the night, her form disintegrating like mist. The villagers stood in stunned silence, the nightmare finally over. In the days that followed, the village was quiet once more. The stories of the Kumiho became a warning for future generations, and Minho was hailed as a hero. But Minho knew that the jewel he had swallowed had given him more than just wisdom. It had shown him the darker side of the world, the creatures that lurked just beyond the veil of night. He kept the jewel hidden, knowing its power, but also knowing that the Kumiho was just one of many dangers that roamed the land. And though the village was safe for now, Minho understood that true evil never dies, it only waits. In a small, peaceful village in Japan, a hard-working farmer named Hiroshi lived with his kind wife, Aiko. They had a small house near their rice field, which was their pride and livelihood. One day, Hiroshi noticed that someone, or something, had been ruining his crops, tearing them up and leaving muddy paw prints everywhere. "It's that pesky tanuki again," Hiroshi grumbled, his hands tightening into fists. Tanuki were mischievous creatures known for playing tricks on humans, and this one had been making Hiroshi's life a nightmare. Determined to stop the animal, Hiroshi set a trap near the rice field. "I'll teach that tanuki a lesson," he muttered. That night, Hiroshi's trap worked. Early the next morning, he found the tanuki caught in his snare, struggling to escape. The small creature looked at Hiroshi with wide, fearful eyes. "You've ruined my crops for the last time," Hiroshi said coldly. "Tonight, we'll have tanuki soup." The tanuki pleaded, its voice soft and full of fear. "Please, spare me. I didn't mean any harm." But Hiroshi's heart was hardened by anger. He tied the tanuki up and left it in the barn until he could deal with it later. Hiroshi's wife, Aiko, had a gentle heart. She couldn't stand to see any living creature suffer, not even a mischievous tanuki. While Hiroshi was busy in the fields, she sneaked into the barn and untied the animal. "Go, before he finds you," she whispered, looking around nervously. The tanuki blinked up at her, and for a moment, Aiko thought it looked grateful. She watched as it scurried away into the forest, thinking she had done the right thing. But the tanuki was not grateful. It was a shapeshifter, a magical creature that could take on many forms. Filled with anger and bitterness, it swore revenge on Hiroshi and Aiko for trying to capture it. That night, while Hiroshi was still working, the tanuki returned. It crept into the house and found Aiko alone. With a gleam of wickedness in its eyes, the tanuki attacked her. Using its dark magic, it turned her into soup. The creature then took on Aiko's form, perfectly mimicking her voice and appearance. When Hiroshi came home, he was greeted by his wife, standing by the stove, smiling sweetly. "I made you dinner, my love," the tanuki, now disguised as Aiko, said in a soft, familiar tone. It placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. Hiroshi sat down to eat, but something felt off. Aiko's smile seemed strange, too wide, too forced. He stared at the bowl of soup before him, a strange unease settling in his gut. "What's in the soup?" he asked, his voice wavering. The tanuki, still wearing Aiko's face, grinned. "It's a special recipe," it said. its eyes glinting with malice. "Eat it." Hiroshi's heart pounded as he lifted the spoon to his lips. Just before tasting it, he noticed a lock of hair floating in the broth. Aiko's hair. A chill ran down his spine as the truth dawned on him. This wasn't his wife. This was the tanuki, and it had done something terrible. "You're not Aiko," Hiroshi whispered, his voice shaking. The tanuki's face twisted into a horrifying grin, and it laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound. "I've taken care of your wife," it said mockingly. "And now, you will eat her." In a burst of rage and sorrow, Hiroshi stood up, knocking the bowl to the floor. "You monster," he yelled, grabbing the nearest tool, a kitchen knife. The tanuki shrieked and transformed back into its true form, the small but fearsome creature it truly was. "You'll never defeat me," it growled, baring its sharp teeth. Hiroshi lunged at the tanuki, but it was fast. They fought, knocking over furniture, the tanuki dodging Hiroshi's every attack. But Hiroshi, fueled by the loss of his beloved wife, fought harder, finally managing to strike the tanuki with the knife. The tanuki let out a final, piercing cry before it fell to the ground, defeated. As the tanuki lay dead, Hiroshi collapsed to the floor, exhausted and heartbroken. The creature was gone, but so was Aiko. His home, once filled with warmth and love, was now cold and silent. In the days that followed, Hiroshi buried what remained of his wife, but he could never erase the memory of that night. The village whispered of his tragedy, and he became a solitary figure, haunted by the loss of his wife and the cruel vengeance of the tanuki. The story of Hiroshi and the vengeful tanuki became a cautionary tale, warning others of the danger of crossing these mischievous and darkly magical creatures. The island of Bali was beautiful during the day. Rice fields stretched out like green carpets under the sun, and the village was full of laughter and life. But when the sun set, fear crept into the hearts of the people. Everyone knew of Rangda, the witch widow, and her band of child-eating witches, the Layak. During the day, these witches blended in with the villagers. But at night, they transformed into terrifying creatures, hunting for body parts from graves and feasting on the blood of mothers and newborns. No one dared to go out after dark, and whispers of missing children haunted the air. Sari was a brave young mother, living with her husband Ketut and their newborn baby, Putu. Every night, as the sky darkened, she made sure all the windows and doors were locked. The Layak hunted for innocent lives, and Sari had heard too many stories of mothers losing their children to the witches. "I won't let them take Putu," Sari whispered to herself, holding her baby close. Ketut, trying to reassure her, said, "We'll protect him, Sari. The village priests are preparing protection spells. The Layak won't touch us." But deep down, Sari knew that no one was truly safe. Rangda and her witches had powers beyond the understanding of even the most powerful priests. That night, as the village slept, Sari was awoken by a strange noise. It was faint at first, a whisper carried on the wind. Then she heard the unmistakable sound of rustling outside the window, like footsteps in the dark. "Ketut," she whispered, shaking her husband awake. "Do you hear that?" Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the wall, followed by eerie, high-pitched laughter. Sari's heart pounded as she realized what it was. The Layak had come. "We have to hide," she whispered frantically. Ketut nodded, grabbing a knife, though they both knew it would do little against the dark magic of the witches. Outside, the laughter grew louder, and Sari peeked through the window. Her blood froze. Standing under the moonlight was Rangda, her long, wild hair falling around her twisted face, eyes glowing with hunger. Behind her, the Layak witches crept closer, their animal-like bodies moving unnaturally in the shadows. Rangda pointed a long, bony finger at Sari's house. "Bring me the child," she hissed. Sari's breath caught in her throat. "No, no," she whispered. The Layak witches began to approach the house. their shape-shifting bodies morphing between lions, monkeys, and creatures too terrifying to name. Sari could feel their hunger, their thirst for her baby's blood. Desperate, Sari knew they couldn't stay in the house. She handed Putu to Ketut and whispered, "Run. Hide in the temple. I'll distract them." "No, Sari," Ketut protested. But Sari was firm. She wouldn't let the Layak take her child. "I won't let them win," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Ketut nodded, holding their baby tight, and slipped out the back door. Sari stayed behind, facing the terrifying figures of the Layak as they drew nearer. With trembling hands, she grabbed the small protection charm given to her by the village priest and held it out in front of her. "I won't let you take my family," Sari shouted, her voice echoing in the night. Rangda laughed, her voice cold and cruel. "You are brave, but you are no match for me." Sari ran out of the house, trying to lead the Layak away from Ketut and Putu. The witches followed, their laughter growing louder, their shapes shifting as they moved through the dark. Sari's heart raced, but she didn't stop, heading straight for the temple where the priests were preparing their spells. "Please, protect my child," she prayed as she ran, the Layak witches close behind her. Just as Sari reached the temple steps, one of the witches lunged at her, its clawed hand grabbing her arm. Sari screamed, but just then, a bright light burst from the temple and the priest's protection spells activated. The Layak screeched in pain and retreated into the shadows, their power weakened by the temple's magic. Rangda stood at the edge of the temple's protective circle, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think you've won," she snarled. "This is not over, girl." Sari, exhausted but determined, stood her ground. "You'll never have my baby." Rangda stepped forward, her fingers crackling with dark magic. But the village priests emerged from the temple, chanting ancient protective spells. The air shimmered with light as the magic surrounded Rangda, trapping her within the circle. "You are bound, Rangda," the head priest said. "You and your witches will not harm this village again." With a final scream, Rangda and her Layak witches were pulled into the ground, disappearing into the earth, their magic broken. The village returned to peace, but the memory of Rangda and the Layak would never be forgotten. Sari and Ketut were safe, their baby unharmed, but Sari knew that the darkness still lurked somewhere in the shadows of Bali. "We won't live in fear," she told Ketut, holding Putu close. "As long as we stand together, we can face anything." The villagers honored Sari's bravery, and the priests continued their protective spells to keep Rangda and her witches at bay. Though the nights were still dark and the Layak were still whispered about in hushed tones, the people of the village knew they were strong enough to fight back. And as the darkness fades, remember, the real chills linger long after the stories end. Until next time, brave souls.